My grandfather spent a night trapped in a church in 1910. He never prayed again. In my house, silence was not peace. It was an iron rule. At 4 p.m, when the shadow of the mountain range began to stretch across the plains like a black hand, I already knew what was coming without anyone having to say a single word. It was enough for me to hear the crunch of my father's rustic leather boots and the heavy rustle of my mother's black cloth skirts to set myself in motion. I was barely 10 years old, and I always walked 3 steps behind, as if I were a shadow forced to follow their heels. From that distance, my father's back looked like an unyielding wall, a massive silhouette that blocked my horizon. I knew perfectly well that curiosity in my mouth was a sin paid for dearly, with the sting of the whip and fasting, so I had learned to swallow my questions before they could burn my tongue. In those days, we children were the world's mute. Nothing more. The road to the town was a path of loose dirt on the mountain, carved out by force by the hooves of cattle and the wheels of wagons. At that hour, the air grew sharp and bit my face. It brought a thick smell of mist, crushed eucalyptus, and the damp earth that was beginning to freeze. The only reminder that the world was still alive was the roar of the river far below, waiting beneath the wooden bridge. Crossing that bridge always gave me chills. The old wood groaned beneath my alpargatas, and through the gaps between the poorly joined logs, I could see the black water rushing past with violent speed, as if it wanted to drag the mountain secrets down toward the plains. Crossing the river meant leaving behind the safety of the rural hamlet, to enter the territory of men, the town. We reached the plaza just as the church bells began to toll, calling for 6 o'clock mass. To my child's eyes, which understood nothing of guilt, miracles, and much less of sin, the temple looked like a gray beast with its mouth wide open. Inside, breathing took effort. It was a heavy blend of cheap incense, the sweat of wool ruanas soaked by the mist, and the rancid smell of tallow candles dripping onto the floor. I knelt where I was told, numb with cold, watching the mouths of the adults move in a unison murmur, praying for things I couldn't even begin to imagine. My mistake happened on the way out. In the countryside, night does not fall slowly. It drops all at once, as if someone blew out the last candle in the sky. At 7, as we crossed the threshold of the church, the plaza was already a pit of shadows, barely broken by the flickering glow of an oil lantern. The tide of dark hats and ruanas dispersed so quickly that it made me dizzy. I stopped for a second. Perhaps it was the reflection of the moon in a mud puddle, or the warped shapes that the church gargoyles cast against the rammed earth walls. I got distracted. A long blink. When I looked up, the plaza was empty. My parents' backs were no longer ahead of me, accustomed to me following them out of pure inertia. They had started the trek back up the mountain without looking back. I ran toward the trailhead, but the mouth of the woods was already pitch black. Without a candle or a gasoline lantern, attempting to climb the mountain in the dark, it was a death sentence among the cliffs and the raging river. Alone, trembling and with fear devouring my stomach, I looked back. The plaza was a desert of ash. The only structure that kept a dying light filtering through the grimy stained glass windows was the church, the house of God, the safest place in the world, or so I'd always heard the old folks say. So, with frozen feet and my heart leaping in my chest, I pushed the heavy wooden door, which gave way with a long groan, and went back inside. The air was no longer the same as during Mass. The warmth of the bodies had vanished, leaving a crypt-like chill that seeped into my bones. Without the murmur of prayers, the echo of my own alpargatas against the stones sounded like a gunshot. The saints in their niches, barely illuminated by the candle stubs drowning in their own wax on the altar, seemed to watch me with fixed, mute, and severe glass eyes, stretching their deformed shadows along the high walls. A sound froze my blood. Heavy footsteps and the jingle of a massive ring of iron keys were coming from the sacristy. Someone was going to lock up. The panic of being found there, of being dragged before the priest, or having the news reach my father's ears, was stronger than any other fear. I had to hide. My eyes scanned the central nave in the dim light and locked onto the dark wooden structure rising on one side. The confessional. It looked like a small fortress of oak, a sacred wardrobe, where men emptied their souls. I thought, with the innocence of my 10 years, that if the church was God's house, then this box had to be the safest corner in the world. I ran to it, pulled open the thick frayed cloth curtain that smelled of old breath, and tucked myself inside, drawing my legs tight against my chest. As the curtain closed, the space shrank to my own size. Through the dense fabric, I heard the dragging footsteps of the sacristan approaching the entrance. Then came the sound of the end of the world, the violent groan of the main doors coming together, the blunt thud of the massive wooden bar crossing the portal, and the metallic screech of the iron latch turning. A moment later, a draft of cold air swept through the temple. The man had blown out the last candles. The faint light filtering through the grimy, stained glass went out all at once, and the darkness became so thick it hurt. I was struck blind in a second. They say that when you lose your sight, your other senses sharpen to save you. But I would have preferred 1,000 times over to have gone deaf that night, because in that black void, when the silence of the locked temple should have been absolute, the wood of the confessional began to vibrate. At first, it was a subtle creak, a pulse that traveled up my spine through the back of the seat. But soon, the wood wasn't the only thing to awaken. Outside the cloth curtain, the central nave of the church turned into a nest of inexplicable noises. I heard the heavy dragging of bare feet on the cold stone, quick footsteps, like those of large vermin scurrying from one end of the altar to the other. The oak pews, dense and heavy, groaned violently, complaining under the weight of invisible bodies sitting and standing in a frantic hidden mass. Someone was weeping near the tabernacle, a dry weep from an old throat, which suddenly twisted into a stifled, mocking laugh that climbed up the pillars to the ceiling. I brought my hands to my mouth and bit my knuckles until I tasted blood. I knew, with the sheer certainty of survival, that if I let out a single sob, whatever was running out there would rip the curtain open and drag me into the void. But the real hell was not outside. Just when I thought the structure was my only protection against the things roaming the church, the air inside the cubicle turned thick and foul, ice cold like a dead man's breath. The grain of the old wood began to emit a hum. It didn't come from the nave. It came from inside the oak, right behind my ears, pressed against the back of my nuca. They were whispers. Hundreds of overlapping voices, trapped in the furniture that for decades had swallowed the rot of the town. They were the secrets that men and women did not dare confess in the light of the sun. My mind didn't understand the meaning of adult words back then, but the images struck my chest like splinters. I heard the trembling voice of a woman confessing to have drowned a newborn in the river before it could cry, the hoarse whisper of a man cursing his brother while planning to poison his cattle. Inverted prayers dripping with hatred, begging for the deaths of children my own age, and forked tongues pleading for God's forgiveness, only to have permission to sin again at dawn. The entire confessional vibrated with human guilt, lust, and cruelty. But amid the tide of deformed laments, there was one voice that froze the beats in my chest. It wasn't the whisper of an old man wasted by years, nor the dry weeping of a woman. It was the voice of a child. The crying didn't come from the tide outside, but from the other side of the screen, as if the echo of his confession had remained suspended in the air, trapped in time. "It hurts, Monsignor," the boy said between hiccups and tears, searching for a comfort that never arrived. He told me it was a secret from God, that if I told my mother, the souls in purgatory would come for her. I tried to pray, but he blew out the candle and held my hands down in the sacristy. Why does God let him do that to me if he wears the cassock too? I couldn't put a name to what I was hearing, but I felt a sickening cold in my stomach. It was the sound of innocence being devoured by the very altar that was supposed to protect it. The worst part was not the victim's plight, but the response that vibrated right after, spoken in the calm, deep voice of the town's head priest, the very same man who hours earlier had blessed us with his hand held high. "Go home, child, and keep silent. This is a test of faith. Brother Luis is only cleansing his sins. Pray 10 Hail Marys and do not speak of this again. God sees everything, and he punishes lying children." The memory of another conversation seeped into the oak, one that didn't happen in confession, but between the walls of this same tiny square. It was the head priest reprimanding the other man, but his tone lacked the holy wrath of a God who punishes sin. "You have to be more careful. The Martinez boy is already starting to ask questions, and the town cannot find out. Keep him away from the altar for a few weeks. If the tithes drop or the bishop finds out, we all sink. God will provide another way, but be careful." In that instant, in the middle of the suffocating blackness of the confessional, the pieces of my childhood locked into place with the force of a kick. I remembered the previous Sundays. I remembered the way the priest looked at me from the pulpit, the fixity of his bird of prey eyes on my shorts. I remembered the Sunday he called me over after catechism class, offering me a piece of candy, while stroking the back of my neck with a hand that was too soft, too warm, insisting that I accompany him to the sacristy to move the silver chalices. I had slipped away, out of pure shyness, driven by that clumsy instinct of small animals that smell the trap before they see it. Air failed in my lungs. My head ached from pressing my hands over my ears with all my strength. I was in the belly of the monster. The walls that ordinary people kissed and revered were built upon the silence of broken children. The worst people I would ever meet in my life didn't have claws. They wore a cross on their chests and used the name of God to camouflage their atrocities. When the first rays of the sun filtered through the grimy, stained glass, staining the stone floor a color as red as blood, I heard the bolts at the entrance slide open. I waited until the sacristan's footsteps faded toward the altar, and, with a numb body and a frozen soul, I stepped out of the confessional. I didn't look at the saints. I didn't look at the altar. I ran for the door, and my bare feet carried me back up the mountain, crossing the wooden bridge, without looking at the black water. I reached home with the path flooded in light, but my mind was plunged into the deepest night. My father punished me for getting lost. and I didn't utter a single complaint while the whip lashed across my back. Years passed. I became a man, and I formed my own family. I grew into a man who is deeply respectful of the church and religion, but not because I believe in salvation, rather because I know perfectly well that the worst demons do not rattle chains in hell. They sit to confess in temples. My wife, like all of us, was raised with the word of God in her mouth, and that is how she raised our children. I never interfered in that aspect of our life, but I was always watchful for the signs. My sons never wore shorts, and my daughters never wore skirts. We were strangers in the town that watched us grow, and I understood that, but I didn't care. I never forced my children to go to Mass, and when we moved to the city and they stopped attending church, I never questioned them. I didn't know what consequences that would have down the line or when we all died, but at least it ensured me that none of mine would ever end up begging a priest not to hurt them. Author's note: the words you have just read are not mine. I did not alter their rhythm. I did not change their rawness, nor did I seek to embellish the dread with literary devices. They belong to my grandfather, Pedro. He died before I was born, leaving behind the reputation of a taciturn man of few words, carrying a rigidity that no one in the family could fully understand. To us, his history was a blank page. However, the past always finds a crack through which to filter its light. Not long ago, while cleaning out an old wooden chest that belonged to the family in our old rural home, a 1930 accounting ledger appeared. Its cardboard covers were worn by time and its pages yellowed, smelling of that dense dust of oblivion. At first, it was just pages filled with numbers. The price of coffee arrobas, livestock debts, accounts for wagons and tools. The routine record of a man trying to build a home in the middle of the plains. But upon reaching the final pages, the numbers ceased. The handwriting changed abruptly. It was no longer the steady script of the tradesman, but a tight, trembling, almost desperate stroke, as if his hands shook as he held the pen. There, hidden in the one place no one would ever check out of boredom, my grandfather had poured out the testimony of his night in hell. He wrote it as an adult, perhaps an old man, but with the panic of that 10-year-old boy completely intact. When my mother found the ledger and read the text to me, I finally understood the reason for his silences, the reason for his distance from churches, and the reason for the almost obsessive care with which he guarded his children's youth. Today I'm 27 years old, and I was never able to look him in the eyes. I decided to transcribe his notes and bring them into this digital format, though I don't quite know why. Perhaps because the horror camouflaged as faith still takes place upon those very same altars. Or perhaps for something far more simple and human. Because I firmly believe that a silence that lasted for more than 80 years finally deserved to have words. Duolingo has been teaching me a language that doesn't exist. I want to say this right away. I know how stupid this is going to sound. But I'm sharing this because I don't know what else to do. And because I think I made a mistake long before I realized it was a mistake. And I've always been one of those average people who know they're average, not ugly enough to get noticed, not handsome enough either, not dumb, not particularly smart, not athletic, not funny on purpose. The kind of guy teachers forget is absent until attendance time, the kind of guy who is always in group photos, but never in anybody's favorite memories. I had no hobbies, no notable pastimes that made me stand out. I only did what other average kids in my country do in their free time. Doom scroll Instagram. And it was during one of those doom scrolling sessions that I came across a viral video. The video showed Maori MPs in New Zealand stage a haka in the parliament. The incident inspired protest from other Maori people, including a hikoi that drew tens of thousands of participants. Every single one of these Maori haka videos had millions of views and comments full of people saying the same things. Powerful, beautiful, chills, warrior culture, etc. And I remember thinking the most embarrassing thought I've ever had. If I could learn this, people would think I was interesting. That's all it was. I mean, everybody around me was doing the same things, talking about the same music, the same shows, the same career plans, the same boring futures. And here was this one thing that felt unusual enough that it could become mine. Maybe this will be the one thing that finally makes me a cool kid in school. The only way I could learn Maori in my country was using the Duolingo app. The problem was that the normal version of Duolingo didn't help me much. The free version only gave me the common languages, and the premium version with Maori lessons had a subscription price too high for me to afford. But I was desperate enough to scratch my Maori itch. That's when I made the biggest mistake of my life. I decided to download a modded APK of Duolingo. I checked everything. I searched around. I found old threads, half-dead forums, random comments. Eventually, I discovered a Telegram channel where people shared cracked apps and region-locked stuff. I asked if anyone had a premium Duolingo mod with Maori unlocked. No one replied except for a guy called Qifar. That was the whole username, just Qifar in all caps. He had a black profile picture that looked blank unless you turned your brightness up. He sent me a file, told me it was a premium build, and told me to uninstall the original app first. I did as I was told. The first weird thing was that even though the app said Duolingo Premium, only one language was unlocked: Maori. At the time, I thought that was kind of cool. I told myself that the modder must have done it for my specific use case, like maybe he customized it because I had asked for something uncommon. That should tell you what kind of person I was going into this. The second weird thing was the app itself. It opened in dark mode by default, which normally wouldn't matter except the dark mode looked wrong. I don't know how else to describe it. It wasn't just dark. The colors felt dead. The green owl icon was there. The layout was mostly the same. The little animations were mostly the same. But the whole thing looked like somebody had rebuilt Duolingo from memory after not sleeping for 3 days. I tried to go into settings and change the theme. The app immediately closed. It did that every single time. Anything I clicked in settings made it crash. Account page, audio settings, theme, help. But honestly, that didn't even bother me that much because mod APKs are like that sometimes. You install them knowing that some parts will be broken. And the actual lessons? They were incredible. That's the part I still can't explain. I learned absurdly fast. I'm not gifted with languages. I struggle with basic grammar in the languages I already speak. But with this app, I was remembering words after seeing them once or twice. I was picking up sentence patterns without effort. Pronunciation drills felt natural. Within a couple of weeks, I was already repeating full phrases from memory. There were a few odd things, though. Some of the sample sentences were strange. A lot of them were about death, shadows, old people, doors, names, and things being watched. Not all of them, though. There were enough normal phrases mixed in that I could brush it off. But every few lessons there'd be something that made me pause. The dead are standing outside. Do not answer the voice behind the wall. Your family must not speak my name. Stuff like that. I figured that maybe Maori learning materials were just more ceremonial or metaphorical than what I was used to. Also, every time I completed a level, the screen would glitch for maybe 1 or 2 seconds. Not a normal lag, not pixelation, more like a pattern. Thin branching lines, pale gray on dark gray, spreading across the screen and then vanishing. It happened so briefly that I convinced myself it was a GPU issue on my phone. Then again, I ignored it because I was learning. And around the same time, everything else in my life started getting worse. My parents had one of those marriages that everybody pointed to as the perfect couple. They were always together, always on the same side. Even when money was bad, even when relatives were awful, even when life was unfair, they were a unit. Then they started fighting, not once in a while, every single day. It happened so fast that even now it feels fake looking back. Small arguments turned into screaming matches. My father started sleeping in the other room. My mother started crying at weird times, like while folding laundry or making tea. Within weeks, they were talking about separation, then divorce, like they had both been waiting for permission to say the words. At the same time, my older brother had an accident. He was the one keeping us steady financially. Not rich, obviously, but dependable. The person everybody quietly leaned on. Then one night he got hit by a truck while coming home. He survived, but his leg was badly injured. After surgeries, the doctors said he wouldn't be able to do his old job again. So my house became this miserable place, almost overnight. Nobody talked normally anymore. There was always tension in the air. My mother blamed my father. My father blamed the stress. My brother stayed silent in a way injured people do when they don't want pity. And me? I spent more time on the app. Because as pathetic as this sounds, that was the only part of my life where I felt progress. The only thing I was good at. The only thing getting better instead of worse. So I doubled down. I started showing off. Not in some huge public way, just casually at first. Saying phrases out loud in front of friends. Correcting people when they mispronounced the new word I just uttered. Acting like I had stumbled into this niche, impressive thing nobody else understood. Most of my classmates made fun of me for it. Fair enough. A few were genuinely impressed. A couple of them tried checking my words on Google Translate and said the translations didn't fully match. I told them Duolingo was teaching me a tribal dialect. I said it confidently too, like I had any idea what I was talking about. And somehow that worked on enough people, including Lamia. I'm not going to be dramatic and call her the love of my life or anything. She was just one of those girls everybody notices immediately, pretty without trying. Quiet in a way that made people lean in when she talked. She had Pacific roots through one side of her family, and when she heard I was learning Maori, she was actually interested. That felt huge to me. Then one day she told me her grandfather was visiting. The man had grown up around Maori speakers. I should have made an excuse right there. I didn't. I was too deep into the performance by then. So I met him. He was polite at first, old, sharp-eyed, the kind of person who can make you feel childish without raising his voice. Lamia asked me to say something in Maori, and I did. I said one of the longer phrases from the app. I even said it confidently because by then I'd repeated it so many times that it felt natural in my mouth. He stared at me for maybe 2 seconds. Then he laughed. Not nervously, not kindly, just a real laugh, like he thought I was joking. He said that wasn't Maori, not even close. Lamia looked embarrassed. I tried to explain that maybe I was learning a dialect. He stopped laughing then, but only enough to shake his head and say, "No, that is not a dialect." I tried saying another phrase, then another, then another. And by the time I exited her house, Lamia's entire family was laughing. I left feeling like my skin had been peeled off. It was exactly the kind of humiliation I deserved, which somehow made it worse. That night I went back to Telegram to find QIFAR. The account was gone. Deleted, banned, changed, I don't know. The username no longer existed. But the channel still had old subscribers hanging around, so I started messaging people who had replied under the message where I originally asked for the APK. Most ignored me. 3 answered. 1 was from Brazil, 1 from Turkey, 1 from somewhere in Eastern Europe. All 3 had gotten different versions of the same app from QIFAR. All 3 had been trying to learn unusual languages, not Maori. 1 wanted Ainu, 1 wanted Cornish, 1 wanted something I'd never heard of and still can't spell correctly. And the similarities got really uncomfortable, really fast. All of them had started learning fast. All of them said the app felt off in ways they couldn't explain. All of them had gone through some personal disaster after starting it. Death in the family, sudden breakup, house fire, job loss, illness. Different details, same pattern, and all of them talked about the app, the same way addicts talk about the one thing that still makes life bearable, like it was the only thing still working. One of them thought I was just exaggerating. Another one said I was just embarrassed because I got called out for pretending to know a language. When I pressed too hard, he accused me of wanting attention and blocked me, but the third person stayed. She was a woman from Turkey. I won't mention her name. She told me she'd also started wondering if the lessons weren't what they claimed to be. She said the translations felt slippery, like they changed their meaning depending on context. She said the level up screen on her app also flashed with branching gray patterns. Then we started exchanging screenshots. I still get sick thinking about that part because even though she had been learning a completely different language, our lesson screens were the same. Not similar, exactly the same. Same lesson order, same sentence count, same achievement titles, even the same weird example phrases appearing at the same stages, just dressed up as different words. One screenshot from her app matched one from mine exactly, down to the punctuation marks in the English prompt. We were not learning 2 different languages. We were being taught the same sequence through different masks. I was typing a reply to her when my phone buzzed. It was a notification from the app. It simply said, "Final lesson unlocked." That was it. No lesson number, no cheerful icon, just those 3 words. I deleted the app immediately. I sat there staring at the empty spot on my screen, like that should mean something. An hour later, Lamia called me. I almost didn't answer, because I thought she was calling to laugh about what happened with her grandfather. Instead, she asked me, very quietly, what app I had used to learn that language. I told her. There was a long silence. Then she said that her grandfather stopped laughing after I left. He had apparently asked her to repeat exactly what I said. She couldn't, obviously, so he wrote down the sounds he remembered. Then he got upset. He told her it wasn't Maori, but it sounded close to something much older, something he only knew about from stories passed down through older relatives. Something that was impossible for me to have uttered, because that language is officially extinct. There are no living speakers. There is no normal way for some random schoolboy in South Asia to know even a fragment of it. The app has been teaching me a language that does not exist. She asked me what else I had learned from that app. I lied and said not much. I don't know why I lied. Maybe because hearing fear in her voice made the whole thing feel real. So that's why I'm posting this here, not for attention. If attention was all I wanted, I got punished for that already. I'm posting because I need to know if anyone else got an APK from QIFAR or from somebody using a different name, especially if you asked for an uncommon language, especially if the app only unlocked one course, especially if it crashed whenever you opened settings. And if any of this sounds familiar, do me one favor. Delete the app before you reach the last lesson. Because ever since I received that notification 10 days ago, I have been hearing someone muttering in my hallway, not loudly, just under their breath. A low muttering, steady and rhythmic, like somebody trying to remember something line by line. Last night, without even meaning to, I recognized some of the sounds, not because I understood them, because I had repeated them before. Into my phone, into my headphones, into my own mouth. I've checked every room. I've checked the roof. I've checked outside with a flashlight like an idiot. Nothing. I know what some of you are going to say. Stress, lack of sleep, grief, guilt, suggestion. I would honestly prefer that. But there's one thing I can't explain. When I'm lying in bed and the muttering starts, I sometimes know what sound is coming next, before it comes. Like I'm not hearing a stranger speak, like I'm remembering a lesson. I deleted the app 10 days back, and something in my house is still speaking to me like it did. Tonight it started earlier than usual, and it doesn't sound like it's in the hallway anymore. It sounds like it's on the other side of my bedroom door.